Welcome to the No Fear podcast and the No Fear live broadcast. I'm your host, Tony Blauer. If you're into mindset training, performance psychology, personal development, you'll dig this new format. No Fear Live is a unique broadcast, and it's different from the No Fear podcast. We decided to go live because we wanted to create the opportunity to interact with people like you all over the world, where anyone can log in and ask questions, and in some cases, you may even get invited into the show. The great thing about the live broadcast is that it's much more personal for the listener. That's you. Remember, self-defense isn't always about a confrontation with someone else. The first and most important fight is winning the one inside your head. Well, I want to listen to the show after that intro. Like I want to hear what this guy's got to say. Just kidding. My team did a great job on that. Hey, listen, this is our first show where we have a guest, and I'm excited to have my good friend Tim Larkin on the show. I'll bring him into the studio in a second. I do want to, for those of you who don't know him, I don't know how that is because he's been around for 3 decades and working with law enforcement, military. He's got 2 great books out, and he's a polarizing individual for many in the self-defense world, and I think that's why we became friends and dig each other. So I'm going to bring Tim into the studio now, and boom, Tim, how you doing, man? Do we have audio? Do we have video? Tim looks frozen. I think he's a little bit scared here. Stand by. There you go. Tim, I can hear you now. Audio. He's still. Hang on a second. Let me text him because he's obviously having some technical difficulties.
Dude, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Let me figure out what's going on here.
What an exciting beginning to the show. Everyone log in now. Hey, while you're logging in, while we're figuring out the technological glitches here, Elisa, you can hear me, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And I wonder if we're having problems. Audio. Guys, if online, can you guys confirm that you can hear me?
Okay, I can use this speaker. I can hear you now.
Okay, cool. Hey, if you're logging in online, can you just confirm that audio's good? Just in the comments, just hit a little heart or tell us where you're from and log in there, and we'll get to your questions after. But Tim, you're good now? You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you fine.
Okay, cool. Okay, great. Thanks, Mike. Okay, cool. Well, dude, I'm returning the favor because I think when you kicked off your new podcast, you had me on as the first guest, right?
That is correct.
Okay, badass. Listen, how many podcasts and interviews do you think you've done in your life?
Oh, you mean on both ends of it?
Yeah,
easily over like 1,500.
Really? Because I was counting mine. I did 1,501. I just counted.
There you go.
101.
You got me beat.
Yeah, just weird, crazy, right? But in all seriousness, I had I found this picture here, and I was trying to find, and I was gonna add you. This is where we had breakfast in Pacific Beach.
Yep.
Years ago, and I was trying to find the picture. I couldn't find the picture of us in where was it? In
Vegas at the martial arts show.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got that one. I got the one with you.
High gear.
I'm holding up your high gear.
Oh my God! If it, you got to send it to me. I couldn't find it because I wanted to we've known each other for 20 years plus. Maybe,
oh yeah.
Oh yeah. So
I always thought it was cool. I tell people all the time, I said, that was my first, because back then it was even worse as far as nobody talked to anybody. And right. You reached out and we were in Vegas, and you not only did we go to the martial arts show, but you introduced me to everybody. You introduced me at that time, all the top UFC guys and everything. It was really fun, and I really appreciated it.
Yeah. Well, I've always been surprised and appreciated you, because you were the one of the few guys that had my back, that said, hey, this guy's talking about real stuff. And I want to dig into that. And the reason I asked you Why? How many shows you've been on? Because I wrote out like a shitload of questions that I don't think you've ever been asked, and because people who know you, you've got excuse me, so much content online. People can figure out that you're a realist, you're pragmatic, but you've really studied violence in a way and turned it into a learning experience for people so that they can have their eyes opened way before they have their body opened by a knife or a gun or something like that. And just to piggyback on something Tim said about things being worse than they are, you still have like the different camps, even like in reality-based training, like these guys hate these guys hate these guys. I think I said on your show that if I could monetize my haters, we'd be doing this from my island. And it's weird because I think you and I, all we want to do is make people safer, and we're just sharing what we can. So,
well, you articulated something that was really cool too when you said that, and you said it before. I used to think that way, but the way you said it to me that one day was, yeah, it's so ridiculous. People are like that. He said, we're in the industry. Anything you're interested in, you're going to have multiple subject matter experts that you're going to look at. I just hope I'm one of those guys up on the shelf, and that's, if I look back here, I've got all sorts of different, books on the same subject from different people, because that's what people do. And I don't understand why, when it gets to this subject, that we think people are only going to see one way. I mean, as you said, we were laughing, we were going, yeah, hey, if you're down to your last, $100, I hope you buy my stuff,
Right.
But yeah, and I think that's such a healthy reality. I mean, I want people, I think the reason I like to interview people like you and people from outside, I want them to hear how people who spent their lives studying this stuff, how they look at it. And you've always been generous with your time that way. And it's been great.
I appreciate that, man. And it's funny, and I don't want to go down this rabbit hole, but we posted on Instagram over the weekend a replication of an attempted murder on a police officer that when I wrote the article for Caliber Press, Violence Doesn't Care What Martial Art You Study, where like if anybody out in the internet reads that line, violence doesn't care what martial art you study, and you get defensive, like that's part of the problem. It's like, was he saying my art isn't, it's supposed to, like, what is this guy talking about? Because when you unpack that Socratically, you go, wow, that's interesting. And there were a bunch of people I don't know if you had a chance to see the video, but
yeah, I did. Actually, it was really well done.
Thank you. But it's a replication, and you got to study the replication. And I actually told people, go read the article first and link. But of course, people just watched it. And then everyone's only looking at the fact that we didn't disarm the guy. And they're going, oh, you would have your back would have been, cut up. He would have stabbed you there. Oh, this is bullshit, and even some experienced guys. And I'm like going, if you want me to take you seriously, if you want to have a real conversation, then you also have to do the research. You have to go, what is the difference between simulation and replication? Were they sparring? We were specifically actually redoing, reverse engineering what happened, and then figuring out different solutions where the guy jumped out of his car, grabbed a screwdriver, and he had a chance to stab Officer Dalton 3 times in the neck with a screwdriver. You can hear him screaming, on the body cam, and then Dalton slams the guy away. Oh my God, what is this? Push away danger, draws his weapon and terminates the threat. And thank God he lived through it. But it's a replication of that, so you can experience the fear. You can't say when you're, it's like Disney doing a documentary and changing the color or something. Like, you're not doing a documentary anymore. You're you're manipulating. But anyways, what are your thoughts? And just another thing is Tim has also been a mentor of mine from the business side over the years. We don't talk about this much, but like any business, you get people ripping you off and betrayals and this and that. And there's been a bunch of times where I would call you up bitching when something happened to me, and you'd be like, holding me in your lap, cradling me, going, like Obi-Wan Kenobi, telling me, "Hey, you got to expect that, man. This is business." And so I appreciate that. It's not just, is this a good fist? Like there's some business shit there. By the way, congrats on your daughter snapping that board.
It's so funny. She's possessed. A good friend of mine in fact, he trained a lot of he got Spider ready for the Machado fight, I think, or the karate fight. He's an amazing point fighter, Hiroshi Allen, and my daughter started watching Cobra Kai, and so she wanted to get into karate, and I'm like, okay, whatever entry point. They're doing jujitsu too, right? But I wanted her to get in, and it is so good. She's possessed. She just loves it. And that's what I love. Nobody ever had to convince me to do something. And I'm kind of that way with my kids. If they show a natural interest, I'm going to give it to them. Right. But she just, she was determined. She didn't care that she was in her Halloween outfit. She had a chance to go break a board, and she went and did it.
That's great. And another thing, like if you don't follow Tim on social media, you're a wonderful dad and a wonderful example, because you're this big fucking macho guy. I'm close to 200 pounds, and I'm pretty thick. And Elisa, how do I put that picture back up there of Tim and I? I can't seem to get it to click back on there. There we go. I don't look like you're a ventriloquist and I'm a puppet on your leg, but I'm like a little guy, compared to you, with that. So you're this big guy, but like I've seen pictures of you, like the kids putting makeup on you and doing your nails and you're a great dad, man.
Yeah, they're hilarious, man. And from a teaching standpoint, Tony, the other thing that's really interesting, yes, I had these kids later in life, but the benefit is when I watch little kids learn, dude, it's helped me so much with my client base, because I realize, like, I tell my clients all the time when we start, because, adults, when they start something new, especially, they don't like to, they're super critical of themselves. And I relay to them how children are, and, giving yourself permission to fail. And that has really helped a lot of people. And the only reason I got that was because I had to start watching my kids at these little ages learn, and they play, they have fun. They don't criticize themselves, when they're learning a new skill set like walking or something like that. So there've been benefits, and they do teach you a lot. They also teach you that you have to live in the present. Nothing. Right. They do not wait. So it's been interesting.
That's great. Okay, so I've got all these questions. I want to get through them because I really thought about this, and I said, okay, with the No Fear Live versus the No Fear, and you've been on my podcast, that's more of a, it's like that particular, it's like a podcast thing. I jokingly refer to this as the No Fear broadcast, because we're broadcasting on 6 platforms, live on YouTube, Twitter, multiple Facebook, LinkedIn. And so hopefully we'll get some really cool questions towards the end. I wanted to interact. I wanted to be able to track that and have that live experience as if you and I were up on stage at an event talking about shit, and we could take audience questions from the audience. But I had a bunch of questions for you. At how old are you now, if I can ask? I know it's not, I don't want to get canceled. Can I ask how old you are? It's a joke.
Yeah, 58.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Do you remember when you started martial arts? What age?
I was 4. My grandfather was a big boxing advocate, and he had us at 4 years old. He gave me boxing gloves for Christmas, and started us off early in his basement, learning how to box. Very that cool. was my intro. And ever since, I'm a Navy kid, so I moved from base to base, and basically every base we went at the Navy pit base, the Marines always had some sort of martial arts program going on that we'd all participate in.
Right. Very, very cool. Okay. Well, that answered 2 of the questions. Were you big always, or did you sprout at one point? Were you always a big kid?
I was more kind of lean. I was lean through about probably till 9th grade, and then I just started. I'm one of those individuals that I guess you'd call it a mesomorph. It's easy for me to put on size, and I have to be careful of that, especially as I get older. Not from a out of shape, but I can put on mass that I don't need,
Right.
and that's, I know a lot of people would like to be able to do that, but I've been very fortunate as far as size, in being able to. That was never a consideration for me.
Yeah.
It's one thing I didn't have to worry about. Now, what I do, obviously for me, because of that, I have to work more on movement because you can get very stiff,
Yeah.
if you don't do that. So for us, as size, I tell people all the time, if somebody's intimidated by my size, they're not the person I'm worried about. I'm worried about that person that really understands violence, and they're not going to be intimidated by somebody who's bigger than them. And that's a consideration. I try to tell people all the time. But yeah, it was something that I would say from ninth grade on.
Okay. Were you? And I've seen it go both ways. I asked your size because I wanted to know if you were bullied or experienced bullying, growing up.
I wouldn't call it bullying. It's just the fact, Tony, growing up when we're pretty close in age, and growing up in my time, especially moving around the 70s and stuff. Every time you went to a new school, it was just a default.
Sure.
You were going to fight,
Right.
And so I always had that new kid, thing that I had to go through for the first 6 months, and it was great. It taught me a lot, but I wouldn't say bullied. I would say the reason. Like going back to the reason I put on size, one thing was school ended. I went to an all-boys Catholic high school in San Diego, and school ended at 3:00, but my mom didn't pick me up till like 5:00 from her job. And so I had 2 hours to kill, and there really wasn't anybody around if their sports wasn't going on or something like that. The coaches let me hang out in the weight room, and I literally had Arnold's bodybuilding book, and I just figure out, just out of no other option. I already did my homework and everything else. So I'd be working out, a minimum of 5 days a week, using weights back when people really weren't using them.
Right.
And it was just something I did just because it was just me. So there weren't too many other things I could do.
Very cool. Very cool. I love these questions. Did you ever get your ass kicked?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. So this is great. So So a bully situation. I'm in 6th grade. I'm going to this the bus stop every day, and there's this bully, and I think he might have been 9th grade in there. I remember his name is Steve. So talk about getting bad information. I tell people, don't get. I hear you say a version of it too. Like be very careful. You don't want to get really good at the wrong thing.
Right. Carefully practice.
My uncle at the time came in for a holiday, and he had been studying kung fu up at Boulder. He's a professor up at Cal State Boulder, and he's telling me, he's going, and I remember he tells me, he goes, even the palm of your hand, he goes, if you just strike the forehead, he goes, it'll stun somebody. So I'm thinking, oh, that's really interesting, So
Right.
Sure enough, I get there Monday morning. Steve's there waiting for me, and he mouths off at somebody, and I decide I'm going to stick up for my friend. Next thing I know, I'm jacked up against a tree, and I'm thinking of what my uncle said. I literally take my palm, I smack him in the hand. The kid goes like this, and he just pummels me. He
Right.
just takes me in the ground. So that's my first lesson in making sure if you're going to learn something, make sure it actually works.
Right. Right. Very, very funny. Good. Fun to see your eyes light up with that memory.
Oh yeah.
With regard to violence, what was the scariest moment in your life?
I've had multiple incidents as a contractor. I've had some things happen. Military. It was like, it's hard for me to do that with the last 20 years. What the guys have seen in the last 20 years, the guys you and I get to work with, and all my friends that are active duty and everything. I mean, what they've seen volume-wise compared to anything, I saw is there. And I think we tend to minimize what we saw. But I think the one thing that got me on track, that there was a difference between combat sports. Like I told you, my grandfather taught us boxing. Well, all my uncles, my older uncles, my grandfather was a former Southie, and then he went legit. And my great-grandfather had pool halls, and he ran liquor with Joe Kennedy. So my grandfather came from a rough upbringing. My uncles were taught that type of fighting. And I remember my uncles were always dressed to the nines. They were very successful businessmen. But we came out one day from the barber shop, and I'm 6 years old, and I'm coming out. I just got a little haircut and everything. I was all up there. And, my uncle really was one of those guys that dressed. And he comes out, and two punks are sitting on the car. They probably, me thinking, I thought they looked a lot older, but I'm thinking, I doubt they're even 18 at this point. And my uncle, they were lying on his car. One of the kids was smoking. And my uncle was very calmly, he goes, "Hey, that's my car." And one kid looks up, he goes, "Yeah, well, what are you going to do about it, old man?" And my uncle was probably like 37 at the time, And he just goes, "Tim, stay here." And he kind of walks over to the kid real calm. And all of a sudden, he just throats him. He just comes right in, hits the ulna right in there, grabs the back of his head, bounces it off the hood, looking at the other guy the whole time, who just runs away. This guy's just bleeding out of his whole nose and everything. He drops him on the curb, opens up the door. He goes, "Tim, get in." All calm, like just very calm. Gets in there. We drive away. And I remember he drives a little bit, maybe a half block. And he looks back at me and he goes, "Hey, don't tell your mother about this." And in one way I was in awe of my uncle. In another way, I was like, that was the first time, my first visceral response to just pure, explosive, one-sided violence. And I remember it stuck with me because my grandfather would always make the distinction when we were boxing. He'd always say, "Boys, you go by the rules, you do this." And then he'd point to the basement window and he'd go, "But if anybody tries to do something out there," and then he would show us stuff that was much more relevant to injuring people, to save your life. Because he was very, very realistic about what violence and when you'd use violence. And so, and as a little kid, Tony, I didn't process this. It was later in life that I understood. I got early lessons that were extremely valuable. And, I'm sure my mother wouldn't be very happy. She's kind of shocked at some of the stories as she hears some of my interviews. And my uncles, they both passed on, but they just looked at it. "Carol, don't worry about it. He did fine. Look what he's doing now."
Yeah.
So.
No, that's a great story, and it's the like for me, I remember getting into a fight when I was 16. I had heard somebody. And I want to come back to ask you why the reason I asked you that, and I think some people, and I think your head went there first. You started thinking about like military and battle, and then all of a sudden this popped up, and that was organic. That's what I wanted, because like for me, I would know this happened, but it was a fight when I was 16 years old, and I knocked on a guy's door. I'd heard he had tried to attack a friend of mine, and I was doing this like, "How dare you touch, she wasn't my girlfriend romantically, but a girlfriend of mine." And she was screaming and crying, and she came to my house, and I found out who it was, and I went over and I rang his doorbell. And when he opened the door, he's like, "Yeah." And she was standing down the steps because we weren't sure. And she goes, she shrieks, and I knew it was him, right? Because she freaked. And I grabbed him to pull him outside, and he was holding on to the house, and he pushed back using, oh my God, the cross extension chain, and pulled me into the house. And as I went into the house, I fucking threw an overhand, hit him in the head, stunned him, hit him again, broke my hand on the shot because his head was going down. And he's on the ground, unconscious, like shaking. And I'm still holding him like this. And I look up, and there's 12 people having dinner, and like all adults. And they're all like, because this happened like this, right? And next thing I know, like I'm in a car chase. I wrecked my Camaro, trying to get out of there. And then 2 days later I was in high school at the time. Like I'm sitting there waiting to pick up a friend, and 2 cars pull up on either side of me, and guys with big lapels get out of the car. And I'm going to get fucking thrown in the river. Holy shit. And, so when I talk about this, like that was the scariest time for me. I was 16 years old, and it was like, in listening to you stuff, like there are some people that violence for them is like you and I brushing our teeth or going, "I'm hungry, I'm going to get a snack." It's just part of what they do in the day, and there's no moral, ethical consideration, and we'll talk about that after. But I love that story of you sharing that story with your uncle. And for people listening, like these are neat things where you can see in that story and Tim's upbringing how that shaped his career and what he's teaching. Because there's lots of people out there, Tim, and that are teaching stuff that you and we look at and we go, yeah, that will never work in a real violent encounter. And if it works for you, you're a unicorn, but in general, it doesn't work for most people.
Yeah.
So
yeah, and that to me it was fun. I'm very fortunate that I mean, people would probably think I'm crazy, that I got to see real violence early on. And then I also, when I got into conflicts as a kid, I never saw it as, in the back of my mind, oh, this isn't the real thing. I saw the real thing, and I know what that is. This is just a bully schoolyard thing. And so it was very easy for me to navigate. Of course, kids were allowed to do things back then. You could get into a fight and you wouldn't get kicked out of school.
Right.
They were much more permissive with things like that. And I think in some ways that was a lot more of a healthier outlet, especially for young boys. To have that ability. Now, again, I'm not advocating, the crazy stuff we see today, but I believe a lot of the crazy stuff is because we don't provide good outlets for kids to take care of situations, and get rid of beasts.
Yeah. No, I 100% agree with you. And I think the craziness of school shootings, people coming back with guns, like it's just insane. I remember, hang on, I'm just going to close my office door. I remember, I just forgot what I remember. Oh, the fuck. I remember there was a guy, his name was Stanley Zan, and so you might even pop on and listen. We follow each other on Facebook, but he was a guy I had never seen him fight, but there was a rumor that he kicked a guy in the balls once in a fight. And so he was like considered the most dangerous guy in and around us there for a fight no one had ever seen, but we whispered, I think Stanley kicked a guy in the balls. Like back then, like that was insane that you would do that in the 70s, right? Now it's like, you don't have a gun in class, you're not threatening people. Like it's crazy what's going on here. But I got a bunch more quick questions for you. When did you realize that you wanted to teach self-defense?
That's interesting. I was always big in the martial arts, but I always did it I never went into a martial art thinking I want to become an instructor or I want to get a black belt. I just wanted to do the work. I really enjoyed the process. But what I found was that the couple times I would be given an opportunity to train new people in whatever I was training in at the time, I realized that I got much better as I had to articulate and break things down for people. And I actually found out that I was pretty good at it. I was surprised that, because things don't always, I wasn't like my brother Paul is a natural athlete. He's one of those guys that can visually watch something and then perfectly mimic it physically. And I was never that guy. I was always like, I had to go step by step by step and really learn and break things down for me. And then once I had it, but it wasn't, I didn't have that instantaneous ability to assess something and just mimic it.
Right.
So I think, I started teaching a little bit in college when I was going to college at USC. We were doing the Korean arts back then. I was doing Taekwondo, and I was teaching in Koreatown, and that was really interesting. And what was interesting about that, every martial art that I got involved in had some element of violence in it. And what I mean is not necessarily the art itself, but the practitioners. So Koreatown was really interesting because I would ride my bike from USC to Koreatown, which now, dude, I was like riding through training day areas.
Right.
And I had no idea. I'm on my bike. I'm just a oblivious kid from San Diego, just going, well, my school's over here. I don't have a car. I'm just going to ride my bike. And I was like the only white guy riding through those areas. But it was great. Nothing ever happened. It was cool. But when I got there, we had two student makeups. Other than me, I was the only white guy. We had Koreans and we had Armenians. And the Armenian kids, I had never really been around Armenian kids. I didn't really know a lot of the stories and stuff. And great kids, really, really I'm sure a lot of them went on to illustrious careers.
Right.
But really taught, like we'd talk after class and they'd talk about, their history in Armenia and the violence, and they talk about the way they would fight. And they were the first ones to teach me, kind of like, Boz Rutten really brought it to everybody when he was in there. But they used to do all the open hand strikes, and they were wickedly powerful. I had no idea, something. It had nothing to do with Taekwondo. It was just stuff we were talking about after. But what was really interesting was, yes, it was traditional Taekwondo. My instructor was great. It was really good. But my takeaway from that time was my conversation with the Armenians. Because again, they were oppressed, and they're people, and most of them were in some form of a criminal organization, and they just looked at violence very differently and very matter-of-factly. And I just, for some reason, I was always drawn to that information.
It's I got to interrupt. It's so fascinating to hear this, because I've known you for years, but like, I've never heard these little stories and these little.
I don't think I've ever talked about them.
Yeah, but it's crazy, because now, looking back and then looking at what you do, I see the intersection immediately. If you had been in 2 or 3 fights and dropped people with a spinning back kick, that you would be teaching what you're doing. Like we go in different directions, because the universe unfolds a certain way, but it's very, very fascinating. Sorry for interrupting. Was there more to?
No, that was basically the point. It was interesting.
So, I think it's neat. There's a Latin expression. You remember the old ASLET organization, ASLET, American Society of Law Enforcement Trainers. So their, I don't know if you knew this or remember this, but their slogan was Latin, qui docet decet, those who teach learn. Yes. And I first read that in 1993, and I was like, oh my God, like, this is, every time I teach a class, before we even start, I thank them for the opportunity for me to get better, because I would not be thinking about this, articulating and doing this move. And I really, I write about that often. Like you, I loved martial arts, but when I ran my school alone in the 80s, I was teaching every single, we were open 7 days a week. I was teaching every single class. I was teaching every single private class. So I would work out at least 35 times a week, which was insane, right? It was like, a couple of group classes at night. I was doing like all the shit. I wasn't one of those, instructors that sat on a chair and went, warm up. I did everything. And then I was teaching a ton of privates. But you learn so much. And this is important to all of you out there who are just starting self-defense or martial arts, or you love what you're doing, but you might want to get into like teaching part-time or full-time. You've got to love to, it's that servant mindset that is big, but you got to love to help and want to teach. You want to see those lights go on in people. And I got that too. I taught skiing and tennis and all these things. And you've heard the story, when I was 15, my mom asked me, what are you going to do? Family business, you're going to be a police officer, a doctor, a lawyer. And I was like, oh, Mom, it's okay. I'm going to be a martial artist like Bruce Lee. I'm going to teach self-defense, etc. I knew there was something in there. I knew there was something in there for me with the self-defense stuff. Do you have a like an origin story for the day you like real? Because all of us have multiple origin stories, even though that's contradictory, because origin story is like should be one, right? But there was like there was there a moment where you went, I'm going to open a school, or I'm going to open a business, or I'm going to, oh my God, like where you suddenly found yourself as an entrepreneur, you got to go all in. Was there something that pushed that or created or something around that?
Yeah. When I ended up my military career, I was in the military from the mid 80s till active duty till right after Panama. And then I stayed in the reserves until Gulf War I. And then, so during that time, I had been training in the original training that I had done, in special warfare and everything. I was just very fortunate. I've told that story a million times. People can hear it, but I had no business being involved in that. The guys just liked me and they had me in there,
Right.
Everybody knows I was 2 weeks away from, finishing up buds, and I blew my ears and my whole life changed. But what was interesting was during that time, I was at the Admiral's Command, and I was getting out. And my goal was I'm going to take 6 months off. I have an international business degree. I've got multiple friends in New York that want me to go to. I had one guy wanted me at Morgan Stanley. Another guy wanted me to interview at Goldman, and they all had ins for me. And then I had other guys that wanted to get me in the commodities market and stuff because that was my thing. So I said, great, I'm just going to take 6 months off. Well, the instructor that I was working with during the time, when he was teaching down there, he started getting inundated with corporate requests and other agency requests, and he wasn't very good at those type of communications. And so he just came to me. He goes, "Hey, listen." He goes, I know you're getting out now. I know where you want to go to New York." He goes, "But hey, could you help me out for a couple of months?" He said, "I've got some of these contracts I got to negotiate, and I could really use a good instructor, and you're available." And I said, "Yeah, I think that'd be fun, So the first contract we did was ExxonMobil, and the first group I taught we taught their security guys, but then I got to teach the CEO and his family, and it was crazy. I started meeting all these people I never would have met in my having gone the traditional route. It made no sense, Tony. It made no sense back then because back then everybody was killing it in finance. They were making tons of money. I think I was making like $36,000 a year, but I got to follow this guy, and it's that. Listen, he's a functioning sociopath. I'm very fortunate that I met him, and I learned so much from him. But he was a difficult individual. But I did that true mentorship. I did that true 10,000 hours under him because we would just go from one contract to another. We went all over the world, and I immersed myself. And it made, like, literally, my mother, was like, "What are you doing?" Everybody, all my families and friends, they thought I was crazy. And I don't know what it was, Tony. There's just something in me that I just loved it. Mm-hmm. And I realized we're doing this differently, and there's a different way to communicate with this stuff. And 6 months turned into 12 years with him. Yeah. And then I went off after that, and did my own thing. So crazy. Yeah, it wasn't planned out. Like I said, it made no sense whatsoever, especially in our industry. It's kind of crazy. Your mom had the exact same response, when you did it. But I think I get that from you, that you had that same thing. It's just, I really, when I saw how this was trained originally, the system that I had, I knew there were a lot of people like me that this is what they were looking for. And It took me forever to find it. And I was just like an evangelist. I wanted to get out there, and I thought everybody wanted to do that. And of course, I changed since then. You and I have talked about that. People, I think people find you. Our subjects are not the type of subjects that are really broad-based subjects. And I know you have the same thing. We have a diverse clientele. I have people that respond to this training from all different demographics. So we really don't have a demographic, I've had a former CEO of Deloitte, and one of his best buddies was a truck driver. And they would meet, and literally Frank would fly him all over the world to train with him. This guy would show up wherever Frank was, his big 18-wheeler, and then get out and train. Two guys that never would have interacted, but they had that thing. So I think that's why, like you and I can totally relate to your aspect of it. But that was it. That was where I had this opportunity, and I realized that people were hungry for the message, and the people that got it loved it right away. Other people, of course, you lose a lot of people because when you talk straight, reality is often, difficult and inconvenient. Right. And, but if you can do it, it's kind of like that matrix, if you're ready to take the pill and stick in reality, you're going to learn a lot of valuable lessons.
That's an amazing story. And I love the CEO truck driver thing, right? Boy hit buddies, one guy extremely successful, but where they were united by their desire to make sure they felt safe, that they had a functioning situational awareness, not an unconscious bias, and they couldn't articulate this, but they're united by physiology, kinesiology, and psychology. Then at the point in the way that like the article I wrote, Violence Doesn't Care What Martial Art You Study. Violence doesn't care if you're a CEO or a truck driver, and when it happens fast. And you have, I don't know, Elise, if we have it, my favorite quote of yours. Can we pop that up? It's the first thing. Let me see if it's, violence is rarely the answer, but when it is, it's the only answer. Uh, uh, you say a lot of smart things, man. This might be the most profound because people, this is super interesting. But it's something that at a philosophical level that I've wrestled with. Like, why wouldn't, if I said to everybody, hey, we should all learn first aid, there'd be nobody that would go, that's ridiculous, you're paranoid, or if you learn first aid, that will attract injury. You've heard that one, like, I don't want to practice martial arts because then I'll attract violence and stuff like that. Right. I'm like, but I look at what we do as pre-first aid, right? It's like if you don't understand how to manage violence and it happens, you better know how to put on a tourniquet or whatever. And I'm being a little facetious here, but I've never understood that idea that people don't want to learn what we teach. It blows my mind still.
I get it to a point to where, the issue is it's a very hard reality. We live in I tell everybody we're descendants of humans that were really good at using the tool of violence, and they really understood how to do it. But we got so good at it, especially in our society here in the U.S., we got so good at it that you're to the point to where we don't think we need it anymore. Like now it's because of the results in the relative peace that we live in now. I'm not, obviously the last couple of years have been crazy, but right. Relatively when you see our country compared to other places, you kind of know where the bad areas are and you can kind of avoid everything. It's a unique country that way. But I get it. They have this illusion. And then, the problem is, the reason I like to do speaking, podcasts, and all the other stuff is I've told you a million times, my makeup of people that come see me are 70-30. And 70% of them have already had violence enter their life. And I don't have to convince them or anything. They're just trying to repair what's left, and it's a really hard road. It's the other 30% that I keep trying to expand on, because if I can get somebody before anything's ever happened to them and give them these principles and knowledge, and as you'll understand what I'm saying. Most people get it wrong. It's not about the physical striking and kicking. Yes, I'm very strict on that. And if you need this information, like I said, when it's the answer, it's the only answer. You need that specific information. But what's more important is when you have that information, this is what people don't get. I tell them, I go, the behavioral change that will occur in you is amazing, because now that you know what it's going to take to survive an incident like this, you're then going to look at your current behavior and saying, where am I taking unnecessary risks in my life? And you make those changes. And that's the coolest. I get lots of feedback. When I get my law enforcement and military guys and they've actually had to use the information, great. I expect them to do it. They're putting themselves out there every day. What's really cool is when you have a responsible civilian that's taking your class and they go, hey, Tim, just want to tell you about this story. The old me would have done this, but I recognized the potentiality for, this going asocial or violent, and I was able to get myself out of there while I still had a choice. And to me, that's the best testimonial I can ever get from somebody, because that's the goal. The goal right. is for me to give you information so you can minimize the chance of violence in your life. Now, when I started out as an instructor, doing mainly, like we did military law enforcement, and that was, our whole thing. It was when I started after 9/11 teaching civilians that I realized, no, you actually had it the best. When you tell me that story about you on the plane, I use that all the time, and once in a while I'll give you credit. No,
okay, good.
Credit.
Thanks.
But when you told that lady, listen, you don't want to learn self-defense. If you wanted to, you'd be like me. You've already been immersed at it at this stage of your life, blah, blah. I think what you mean to say is, and I hope I'm quoting this correctly, I think what you mean to say is, how can I live a life that minimizes the chance to need self-defense?
Yeah.
And dude, that was just, when I heard you say that the first time, I was like, exactly. That's exactly the approach that people, and quite honestly, most people, and I know all the hardcore, guys that think they're hardcore, not me. But listen, nobody wants to deal with violence if you don't have to. You really do. I think most of us want to learn how to live a life that minimizes the chance of violence coming in our life. And so to me, that's the bigger goal now, when I do that. I think that's what keeps me going after all these years, because I love sharing that message with people that really have never thought about the subject,
Yeah, super interesting, and you got a good memory, and the quote was close enough, but it's just this idea that you of course know the expression, the pen is mightier than the sword, right?
Yeah.
So I added another kind of a semicolon and a little poetic license, and I tell people the pen is mightier than the sword when you know how to use a sword. In other words, and you'll appreciate that, like you teach people how to disable people who are hell-bent on harming you, maiming you, killing you. So you can't spar with somebody who doesn't care, they're asocial, or they really want to injure you. You should not be sparring with them, and violence loves speed, and when it happens fucking fast. But your ability to detect and avoid, diffuse, and de-escalate is enhanced by studying violence, and that's the whole message there. It's not, it's that I never understood that mindset of somebody. Well, I don't want to bring this into my life, so I'm never even studying it. It goes back to that first aid. You don't buy a fire extinguisher going, right. Kids, I bought the fire extinguisher, it's over here, and man, I hope the house burns down or catches fire, because otherwise this is a wasted investment. It's, you hope and it's the same thing with self-defense. And it's interesting because we'll have to do another show on this, just on that martial art mindset, because there's so many people that don't realize you can study all the martial arts you want and love them, but can you step out? I think Fitzgerald wrote that the sign of intelligence is the ability to hold two opposing thoughts in your mind and just contemplate them, right? Is it possible that training with Tim or training with me or somebody else who's saying, look, like, we've studied violence, fear, and aggression, and these are things you should know about, and they're not covered in this art or this art or this art, because the focus there is the art, the culture, the experience, the relationships. And I say this, and you articulate things more mature. There's something about the way I explain it that I think needles people, and I don't know what that is. But I'll look at violence and I go, look, if you watch body cam, CCTV, smartphone video, and you use a lot of video in your education, like, how often do you see technical martial arts solving the problem of violence? Like, it's almost a zero. And there's something here. I'm going to put this up. If you guys haven't seen this, Google this. But I'm going to put this up. This is one of my most favorite things that you ever did, and I've used this a bunch of times in training. And Elisa, do you know how I get this to be full screen? I just wanted to show this. There you go. And can you hit play on it for me? I got Elise in the background. Or do I need to? Because it's on my screen. I'll hit play.
He even flicks at one girl's hair. Again, a lot of totally avoidable antisocial aggression. We'll talk about that later. Now, I want to stop it right here. This is where you see the two fighters. First one is Keo Mena. Second one's going to be Falcoa. But what's more...
Hey guys, I'm just going to pause. I'm going to play it a little bit. Some of you are listening on audio and you can't see the video. So if you want the full experience with what we're doing on the No Fear Live, is you're going to want to go watch YouTube or Facebook or whatever to see this. But this is a breakdown of a fight that Tim did several years ago, and it's a fantastic breakdown and explanation of what we were just kind of about to dive into.
Interesting to me at this point is look at the posturing that's going on right now. This is that antisocial aggression. Both of these guys, both of these fighters are extremely comfortable here. Why? Because they're used to guys getting up in their face, doing that whole thing, the pre-fight hype. They're going to perform pretty well at this point because it's just going to be basically 2-on-2. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so it's starting off. Now, this is where the skill sets look. They feel pretty comfortable. They're flailing around, but nobody's really getting injured, which is kind of interesting. But it's something that they're used to. Now, this, I'm going to hold it here, is where everything changes. They go outside. You'll notice we've highlighted a 2x4 that's being used.
And you're going to see that Alcoa has no idea how to deal with this. He's doing exactly the wrong thing he should be doing. And he has a choice. He can do one of two things. He can either charge forward or he can go back. One gives him the ability to actually survive the situation and probably get to the guy. The other one makes him a much easier target. Unfortunately, he chooses to be a much easier target. Let's look at the result. He gets hit. Now he's out of the page. Now you'll notice, stopping it right here, Keo Mena is completely focused, just like he was on the ring, with the one guy that he's fighting. He's oblivious to everything else that's around him, and that's when the same guy with the 2x4 comes running up behind him and brains him in the back of the head. This is a strike that's put him into a coma, along with the multiple strikes that you see after this. But the key was, in the ring, he doesn't have to worry about that. He has a ref watching his back. He's used to seeing a ref in there, but he's not used to seeing another threat. And so he's not defining. He's not fighting for that. He's not moving around. He's not seeing the threat. And that's why it was so easy for this unskilled guy with the 2x4 to run right up behind him and brain him in the back of the head. So take a look from here. It only gets worse. You'll see he goes down, and this is where they really start to put it into him. He hits hard on the concrete, and look, they just jump on top of him. Unskilled fighters, unskilled regular guys just taking shots at him, kicking him.
That was amazing, man. I love that. I've shown that and sent that to so many people. But those of you who are watching this and understand, this is what when I would say in your 70-30 that you were talking about, people who've experienced, the people that train with us, 100% of them, well, let's say 97% of them are people who study martial arts and have heard about us and are finally, they're tired of lurking or something has happened and they come in. But this is the messaging that we're trying to explain to people. And what I did, and that was an 8-minute video. I only showed you guys a couple of minutes of it, but Tim included clips of these guys, like profile shots of their MMA stuff. These guys are like 5% body fat, experienced fighters fighting, if you say to somebody who studies MMA or jiu-jitsu or taekwondo, and they've gotten to, a blue, brown, black belt level, if you said to them, hey, would you like to take a self-defense course? 99% of them are going to look at you and smile and go, I'm good. Thanks, man. Because they've confused combat sport with the asocial arena. Do you want to take a spin on that? I mean, that's your whole.
Yeah. Well, and what's funny is it's not we're not denigrating combat sports. Combat sports are amazing, but combat sports gamify violence to have a competition. And the only way you can gamify violence is you take out direct injury to the human body. Just looking at the rules. If you look at the rules, last time I looked, it was 31 rules and 27 of them were all about direct injury to the human body, maim, crippling, or killing somebody. And yeah, there's no place for that. But when you open that up in the street and people are just going to use violence, they're not going to play the game. You have to be aware of that. Now, what's interesting is when I train combat athletes, I've had some amazing guys come through. They're great. They just realize, hey, that submission hold, now we're going to drop our body weight through it and make it a joint break. Hey, this we're going to do. And these guys are phenomenal. They're great, but they don't train that way because their goal isn't to maim, cripple, and kill their opponent. It's to better him through skill sets. And that's why we take out areas of the human body on there. But what's so important is when your life is on the line, you don't want to compete with somebody. You want to use the skill sets of destruction, and you need to know where to go in the human body to get those things. And you also need to understand that it's a whole variable, like we saw with those guys. All of a sudden there's people from all around. There's another great one when Conor and
Khabib.
Khabib. When everything went crazy in the ring at the end, here's two highly skilled fighters. Like Conor's getting hit in the back of the head and the mob and everything. It just goes into chaos when it's violence. It's I think a lot of times when people, I've heard people say certain things, and good dudes, guys that are, really good operators and stuff like that. But I think the biggest problem, Tony, is people are imagining the duel. It's something I've talked about for years, meaning violence is not a duel. It's not it's a rare situation. Bar fights where people square off? Sure, that happens. That's more antisocial. Violence is more, watching, if you watch a leopard or a lion, lying in wait, super quiet, coming up and just attacking out of nowhere. That's usually what you're dealing with in a violent situation. And it can usually be very one-sided. And if you don't understand what to look for, highly trained individuals, have been taken out by very unskilled people who just wanted to do destruction.
Yeah.
And that's a reality. It's a hard reality to swallow sometimes. I did a podcast with Forrest Griffin one time, and great podcast. We had a great time, but he was conceding it, but he was a little bit like, taken aback by some of the things. But he's a former corrections officer,
right.
And he started to understand some of the examples I was giving. And he goes, yeah, you're in that position, because Tony, you end up doing what you train.
Right.
And so, if you only train for something that has, a rule base, a ref, a defined area, defined weight classes, all of that, then that's how you're going to respond when your life's on the line. And that's why getting some knowledge, and that's the great thing about what we give. We can really give you great principles in a very short time that will stick with you. It's proven. Why? It's just the way it is. Destruction's a super easy skill set. And the hard thing is how to wrap your brain around it when it would ever be, justified, moral, legal for you to do anything like that. And that to me is the fun part. I love putting people in that context, where, what would it take? What would the conditions be for you to use information like this? And you realize it's that rare black swan event. And what's great about that is when they realize that, they dismiss all the stuff that is just ego-based or just trying to get them riled up that could turn violent. They realize, oh, this is not the right time to use this. I can get myself out of here. I'm not going to be pulled in on this one.
And this comes back to what you said earlier, and it's really, it doesn't surprise me the synergy between our programs. And we've talked about this offline as friends and entrepreneurs, saying almost identical things differently because our brains are different, our research is different, but arriving at the same conclusions. And that the ability to avoid violence is enhanced by studying violence, and you understand and you in your courses give so many examples, but it's the pre-fight, like Minority Report. If we knew in advance, and there's a line you use that I love and I shared, that our natural tendency, we're having a bad day. The last few years has created so much mental health issues and pressure for people. But you said something to the effect that if you're in a confrontation as a human, and you might want to assert or lash out or whatever, but you said something like, you just imagine that this person's 10 seconds away from being that next, like serial killer or go postal. What's your, what I'm saying?
I treat, and people think, oh my God, you must live a very paranoid life. And no, I don't. It's just, it teaches me to be very civil, even in an uncivil situation. But what I do is I literally think, I go, hey, I don't know anything about these people that I'm interacting with right now. I'm going to treat everybody like they're 6 seconds away from a shooting spree. And I don't want to be the one to trigger it. And so that's how you interact with them. You interact as a human as much as possible, right. And that is a great skill set to have. And
that's good.
It's weird. Like people they think it's really funny when you and I talk about stuff like this. They go, well, okay, what about the punching? What about? That's the easy stuff, man. And yes, you'll get that. Don't worry. You're going to get more than you want, most likely. But what we're trying to tell you is these are the things, the decisions you make prior to any sort of event and how you're going to handle things is so important, and that's a very personal decision for you. My point of where I would use violence is probably different than, some of my clients, but we all have that, and we all should think about that ahead of time. And when you go through good training, it forces you to think about that,
Yeah. And that's the one thing that I've been talking about a lot lately is like what is relevant, important, and what your capacity to manage and make decisions changes when you're 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 kids, no kids, no kids, someone cuts you off and you're like, you motherfucker. Like, and then a day later you have a kid and that person cuts you off. Your behavior didn't change. You're like, shit, I got my kids in my car, the wife in the car. Settle down. We got to learn to diffuse ourselves in order to diffuse others. A couple more things here, because I'm trying to keep these. You and I could talk for hours, and we will. We'll have another couple more questions here, and then there were only a couple of questions in here. Do you have a martial art or combat sport hero, like somebody that you just always inspired you or looked up to, or you know?
For me, it was probably Jack Dempsey growing
Really?
up. And I know that's crazy,
Nice.
you know,
Yeah,
but
good.
his book, Championship Fighting, was one of the first books where a professional talked about self-defense, a professional boxer, and how important it was, and the difference between training the sport. His big lament was he thought boxing at that time, I think he wrote that in the 60s, was losing its ability to be used for self-defense because they were teaching kids how to win on points. And he thought the idea of bodyweight punching is something that every kid can learn, and it really helps you to understand, how to protect yourself. And you saw that going away. And then over the years, you've seen, same thing in BJJ. You've seen guys like Hicks and Gracie say, hey, we're getting away from, the very practical self-defense applications that we have. And, we're going too far into the competition side of things. So that, to me, that resonated as a young kid. I mean, my mom on rainy days, I told you I'm a military kid. My dad would be deployed a lot. So my mom, to get rid of us, would drop us off at the Navy library on a rainy day. And so we just naturally go and read. And I remember I picked up Championship Fighting, and I was immersed. I had it. I had to take it back, because my mom wouldn't let me keep it. And
Dude, I got to interrupt here because I got goosebumps when you said that, because that was also one of my favorite books. And it was one of the things. There was a drill or a little sketch in there where he showed. Do you remember where it's a fist against the wall and he shows the proper way?
Yeah, I used that the other day with my daughter.
Come on.
I did that. Yeah.
So crazy.
Yeah. It's one of the best. There's some great training aids in there. What caught me, Tony, was, I tell people this all the time, is there's also at the very beginning, I remember I'm leafing through it. I'm thinking, am I going to read this? And then I see this thing where a guy's walking down the street. They call him a truck driver. He's got the flat hat and, a good sized guy. And there's a baby about to hit him, falling from the building. And his whole analogy was body weight in motion. And even a little baby dropped from 2 stories up could take out this. Yeah. It was like visceral, and it was a little sick, but it was great. It caught me right away. And that's what got me into the book.
Interesting, eh? Isn't that cool? And I like this whole understanding, like the biomechanics and the alignment, and that impacted how, how I would practice striking, just understanding how the body's aligned up properly. And of course, you've taken it the other way. If you understand how it's lined up, you understand how to break it. And do some damage there. So that's very cool. I did not think you were going to say Jack Dempsey, but that's cool. It's one of my favorite boxers also. Okay. Couple more things here. We've alluded to this, but if you could summarize a pet peeve about the martial art or self-defense industry, and you could reframe it in a way that it's not, I hate this, but if we change this, things would get better. Or no comment. Next.
Really smart guys. Really, I mean, you have to make a choice on what you want to train. It's really interesting. I was listening to Jocko do an interview with Marcus Capone. I think they were talking about the psychedelic stuff. Marcus is a great dude, and he was talking. Back then, there's a big thing in the spec ops community at that time about combatives versus MMA. And MMA and particularly BJJ. Now, listen, I love BJJ. I train it. I love getting humbled in it. It's fantastic. It's great, and it's a good camaraderie, and it's a great skill set. All my kids are going to have it. I want my girls to have it. I want them to get used to being grabbed and all that stuff. I want to say that. But, I did an interview with Robert Drysdale and stuff, and everybody talks about, there are limitations to using that in a violent situation. And what was interesting was Marcus was talking to Jocko, and he said, yeah, at one point I found myself training, and these guys are, they're DevGru guys. Right. And he goes, I'm trying to grab his gi to choke him out. And I caught myself going, what am I doing? Why don't I just crush his throat? Why don't I just get in there? I'm fighting for my life. I got to go. And he goes, yeah, I just decided that was it. I wanted to focus more on that because it was more applicable to the mission. Mm-hmm. And what I want to tell people is, listen, one's not right or wrong. They're both great. But what do you want to train for? And then don't get caught up with this is that, and this is better, this is not. And people always say, well, you can't do certain things. Like I heard some very smart guys who are really big on jiu-jitsu. I don't know what it is about jiu-jitsu. They think it's like just the ultimate, except the guys that have to use it on a practical basis all the time. They will tell you the limitations, just like everything has limitations. But I heard this guy, a really smart guy that I like, say, oh, you can't take my eye. I just close it really hard and you can't do that stuff. I'm thinking of all the videos I have of people losing their eyes. And I'm going, I can't believe this guy believes this. Right. And the idea is, what he doesn't understand is, my first question when people say stuff like that is, what are the stakes? Are you guys just grab-assing with your buddy? You really want to blind your buddy? You really want to rip his eye out to prove a point? Unless you're a freaking functioning sociopath, that's not it. But I will tell you, you're an idiot if you think somehow, the human body, which again, we use sports injury areas, because those are humans colliding with humans, humans colliding with the planet. Listen, man, we are very vulnerable in a lot of areas, and you're making assumptions that are just, incorrect on that. You're thinking the only thing this guy's going to be doing is going for your eye. You're going to forget about the 2 strikes before that loosened you up to where you're not even thinking about your eye as he goes in and takes it. That's how it happens. You got tons of video showing that. And again, the other thing with that is, I've never been impressed with a martial artist or an influencer in this world who professes to be the tough guy that's in there. And what I mean by that is that they're not bad guys. A lot of them are really good showmen and stuff like that. But a lot of people think, oh, yeah, this is the way to go. I mean, I guess it's because I've been so immersed in violence and I've been around such truly violent people. And I've been in, talking to the Aryan Brotherhood, Black Guerrilla Family, the corrections officers, seeing what real killers are like and how they act and how they give no warning whatsoever. It's just efficiently brutal. It's real violence. And so I when I look at stuff, I just look at it from that standpoint, meaning I can see a great combat sport guy and I love him and I love watching him and he's awesome. I don't mean he's bad or anything like that, but he's a good human, but I've seen the darkest of human beings who are really good at just ripping each other apart with improvised tools. And that's what I look at. I look at that aspect of it. If I'm going to look at, what do I want to do? I want to make sure my stuff, anything I'm teaching my people, would work on somebody like that. We're going to decrement function or we're going to shut down a sensory system, because if you don't, with individuals like this, they will not hesitate. Mm-hmm. And so I always keep those as my avatars. And so in the industry, I think there's a lot of, they've lost any humility in their approach. They become advocates, such advocates for whatever their art is, that they fight amongst it. Whereas you and I say all the time, hey, violence doesn't care what martial art you do. Meaning, you could use a very effective strike from Taekwondo that gets an injury on somebody in a violent situation. I'm going to go, hey, good on you. You got it. Right. It meant everything. I don't care where you learned it. You could do some really effective stuff from various martial arts that can get a real injury and save your life on the street. But you have to understand how to apply that. And so I think people have to understand that if you can go, quote unquote, full speed, then that has to, by default, mean that you're not getting into the vulnerable areas of the human body from a sparring standpoint. Meaning you're not, you're hitting areas, if you don't have any protective gear or anything, you're hitting areas of the human body that can take non-specific trauma. And it feels good because you're going fast, but you move things up a couple of inches and you're going to get a real result that you can go on, to save your life. And so there's this idea of either or, if you're not doing jiu-jitsu, then you suck. And then the other thing I hate is the guys in the reality self-defense, what I'm talking about, guys that probably couldn't walk up a flight of stairs without, falling over, just saying that their mystical training is so dangerous they could never go in the UFC. I think that's such idiotic, right. Thing. So both sides have their extremists. And I think what I've seen, though, in the last couple of years is there seems to be this default that it has to be a combat sport, because that's the real thing. That's where you're going to really be, quote unquote, pressure tested. And what's really interesting to me is when you talk to these guys and you go, okay, well, what's your biggest learning? How did you learn the most? And it's always some form of slow, correct, accurate training. I heard Rogan say earlier, he was talking to Mark Zuckerberg about BJJ. And Mark was saying, yeah, it gets confusing during sparring and everything. And Joe stops him right there. He goes, hey, listen, let me tell you, the biggest jump I ever had in my learning curve was when I used to just do drills with Eddie Bravo at about 20% speed over and over and over again, honing those foundations. And, when you're anybody that really gets that mastery level of anything, slow, accurate training is a foundation, because you have to really learn where to go, especially if you're doing the stuff that you and I teach. You want to make sure that you're putting that 1 square inch on the 1 square inch you want. And people will say ridiculous things like, oh, you can't target under pressure, you can't do this. No, wrong. I mean, it's just idiotic to say that, right? Because I can prove to you that it's very easy to learn targeting. You just have to train correctly for that. So again, I go out of my way. I love combat sports. I know you're a huge combat sport fan. Hell, I just took my son to the Apex Center here at the UFC, and we had a blast watching the fights and everything. And nobody's a bigger fan than me. But again, my job is to say, okay, but if you're out in the parking lot and it hits you with multiple people coming at you in an environment that has, concrete, cars, all these other things around you, plus somebody's using tools. Yeah, there's some other knowledge you need. And it doesn't make you bad because you don't have this knowledge. That's the other thing with combat sport guys. Most of them come to me and they're completely humble. They're, these amazing fighters that could just tool me up in the ring. Right. And yet they come to me and they go, hey, Tim, I just, what happened? This happened to my brother the other day. I didn't know what to tell him. A guy drew a knife on him, and, what do you do? And they want to learn. They're really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. That was a great rant, man. Such a good rant, very eloquent, way more polite than I am. I'm learning a lot, taking mental notes. Because it's, we break things down with our 3Ds: detect, diffuse, defend, detect and avoid, diffuse and de-escalate. And if you can't defend yourself, if you spend all your time practicing the defend part, then you develop zero skills or self-awareness to be situationally aware about D1, D2. And that's that whole thing, is like learning how to avoid it. This person is 6 seconds away from a shooting spree. And that's not about being afraid or paranoid, like you alluded to before. It's treating people with dignity and respect. And it's the classic. I think Roadhouse was ahead of its time in terms of psychology. It's be nice until it's time to not be nice. As that line goes. And a lot of, particularly guys, but people need to understand that avoiding danger and walking away from danger, even if you're scared, doesn't mean that you're not brave or courageous. I always tell people it takes courage to confront your ego and your pride, and then move away. Yeah. And it's like, what's the consequence? What's it cost? We always ask people, what will it cost you if you don't fight back? Meaning, like, I need to manage my fear to protect myself and my family. But then the flip side, taking it is what does it cost you if you just go in thinking like the guys in that gas station fight, where it was just, well, I'm an MMA guy, I'm going to kick these guys' butt. And you probably saw this, that video that went viral of the guy that got stabbed in the neck in Australia and died, with him.
I did a breakdown on that.
Yeah. So, when I was sharing that with people, I paused it just as he was doing his monkey walk up to the guy, going, let's go. And I said, imagine if right now, I could whisper in his ear, he's got an earpiece, go, hey, in 33 seconds, you're going to be dead. If you continue walking towards this guy, you're going to be dead. If he believed that, he'd have probably stopped and left, and you deal with the adrenaline and the fuck that was close or whatever, but you're not dead.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's
well, and the other thing of using that 6 second analogy that I give you is, what's interesting is you can quickly learn whether you're truly dealing with a violent predator or you're dealing with a human that's having a bad day. by the way they respond.
That's subtle and great.
If they ignore what you're saying and they're still, then okay, I'm dealing with a predator.
Because let me stop you for a second. Let me stop you for a second. Everyone, I'm going to have Tim repeat that. In our choice speech de-escalation method, we tell people those who talk can usually be persuaded to walk. Meaning you got to understand that psychology. So go back to that, because what he just said there might save one of your noses or your life. Go ahead, read that.
Yeah. So, you have
the part where you said like the 6 seconds analogy.
Oh, me. Oh, yeah. So when I talk about the idea of treating people like they're 6 seconds away from a shooting spree, what I mean is you're going to interact with them as a human, meaning, hey, buddy, I'm sorry. My name's Tim. Did I offend you? Did something happen? But if they respond to you and talk to you and say, yeah, man, you did this, you said that, you go, oh, I'm dealing with a human with a bad day here. This is solvable through social skills. I'm pretty good. I can get away from this, or I can just walk away and it will be okay. If you have somebody that, okay, they're not recognizing any human interaction at this point, they're just trying to get closer to you, you're dealing with a predator. So again, is it being paranoid? No, it's a filter you can use to really see, okay, what am I dealing with to assess the threat? And it's also a great way to interact with people. I had a guy that was really pissed off at me for no reason. I interacted with him that way. He ended up apologizing, telling me what a shitty day he had. He really appreciates my approach and everything, and ends up finding me later online, comes to class, and just tells everybody, go, yeah, I realized had no idea who he was when I was reacting this way. He goes, and I realized, I'm so glad he acted the way he did. And he goes, I want to make sure that that's how I respond and go into it. And to me, that's just it. Again, does our stuff work? Yeah, it works really well. It works really. It's brutal. I mean, the stuff I teach. Listen, I'll teach you to tear apart the human body in very specific ways. I'll tell you right now, you don't ever want to have to use it. Right. It's not what you think, and that's the thing. That I remember the first time I used information like that to save my life. I didn't really understand luckily, I was with a very experienced operator, and I didn't really. I puked. I had cold sweats after I won, and I had all this other stuff, and my body was weak and everything. And he told me, hey, it's normal. It's normal. He goes, It's your body getting used to it. He goes, your body getting used to it. Don't worry about it. Because I was embarrassed. I thought I was being a fearful coward. Yeah. But nobody ever told me what the body's nervous response is after and everything, and what you do your first couple of times. Because I was a young guy, and to me, that's the importance, especially now that we're these ages, Tony. It's really fun to leave being the guy performing with everybody and outperforming everybody and doing all that to the guy now that's just hey, I've come full circle, and I want you guys to get the best of the knowledge. I want you guys to have a far more direct path than I had, and let me tell you what I learned, and let me tell you how I wish I could have done it. And that's really my whole thing right now is I want anybody training with me to be better than I was at every stage of the game. Right. I want to give them, a much more direct path to the information they're seeking. And that makes it much more fun.
I love it, man. I love it. We're going to have to wrap soon because I got a hard stop at 11 o'clock. I wanted to ask you one more question, and then we'll answer a couple of questions that came in. What, if you could summarize, what is the most important lesson that you've learned analyzing real violence?
It's a hard lesson for people to do, but I mean, anybody that's followed me knows this is one of my big tenets is you have to protect your brain on how it views violence. Therefore, you're going to have to do some difficult things. My drill that I have everybody do is, especially if they work for me the first time, I say, hey, for the next 30 days, here's your homework. When you see an act of violence on the internet, you see it in movies, you see it in any sort of media or something like that. What I need you to do is, if there's sound, turn the sound off, watch it. Don't think good guy, bad guy. Look at the situation and go, when does something happen in this event that completely turns everything in the other guy's favor? When does he start winning or she start winning? What are they doing? Normally what you'll see some sort of a injury to the human body that the person has to respond to. The trauma is so great they have to respond to the injury, and then usually it goes horribly wrong for that person. But you don't want to focus on the victim. There's nothing to learn from the victim's perspective. And what I mean by that is you want to always associate your brain with the winning side of violence. And then you're associating, oh, that's work. That's good information for me to know. That's what I need to understand. Or you can alpha it, and I'll tell you where this came from. Or you can sit there and look and go, okay, that was good, but I would have done it this way. Now you're not condoning the act of violence. You're not. It's probably a horrible criminal act of violence. But what you're doing is you're teaching your brain how to look at only the successful use of the tool. And where this came from, it came from a really interesting study. I think it was done probably close to 20 years ago. I think it was at Kern State that they went and they talked to a lot of like members of Mexican Mafia and all the gang members and a lot of the real shot callers and killers. They showed them various self-defense things and acts of violence. Not one time when these guys were viewing it did they ever see themselves in the victim's situation. Couldn't imagine themselves in the victim's situation, and they never tried to undo what happened to the victim. What they always did was they looked at the winning side of violence, and then they do exactly what I just did. They go, okay, yeah, that was good. Yeah, he did good work there. Or the alphas would sit there and say, yeah, that was good, but I would have done this. And they improve upon the use of the tool. So for them, they're always mentally on the winning side of violence, and it keeps them much sharper and much more able to call upon it right away. Whereas if we look at it from the victim's standpoint, we're looking at violence already being done to us and then us trying to do the unviolence of it. And it gets people uncomfortable, and especially other trainers, they think, well, no, I understand what they're saying. I'm just telling you from the mental aspect of my clients. I want my clients, the first thing to hop out of them when they know it's on, I want them to hop out with what they can do to the other guy immediately from whatever profile they have. And this mindset has really helped people an awful lot. They see things totally different. And again, it's a challenge because you're going to see some horrible people doing horrible things. But for you're inoculating your brain on how to look at the tool and see what works, because that's the only thing that matters. It doesn't matter if it's a good guy or a bad guy, it works. And that's kind of that's the hard homework I leave everybody with.
That's awesome, man. That's awesome. So many things. We'll have to do this again. Hope you had fun because the hour and a half is too short. Let's do really quick because I promised. There, Elisa, can you pump up one of the questions we had? There was, guys, if you want to also, Elisa's popping that up. So we got Steve, and Steve, I'm going to let Tim answer this because he's my special guest. But think back to what he said in the beginning, right? I don't know if you heard the beginning where I said, I just seen him post a video of his daughter breaking a board. And he said, I don't care what her entry point is. As soon as she starts to fall in love with martial arts, I can, it's like somebody, you got them eating and now you slip in some broccoli and going, try this a little bit more healthy than that chocolate. But Tim, what would you recommend Steve do?
I'd say the most important thing is the instructor. Is the instructor really good for a teenager, of her age? Why? Because you want it to be a positive experience for them. Like Tony said, it's a launching point, and you want them to enjoy it, have fun, and then you can teach them, the other stuff. Like my girls, I know that they're getting the physical dynamics I need them to have. My son has the physical dynamics I need him to have, my younger son. And that when they're ready, I can then slip in, my stuff, because I have no illusions that, my 9-year-old daughters are going to be able to fend off a predator. That's just not, it's just not realistic. That's the unfortunate job we have, and we have to, as parents, make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect them. And why do I say that? I say that because every time they've done a study on this, kids have learned self-defense, stranger danger, all that other stuff. Then they'll go do those drills. You've seen them before. I think John Stossel did it with a bunch of cops where they posed as predators and every kid got in the car. Hey, will you help me with my puppy? Hey, will you do this? Because these predators know how to manipulate young minds. So I don't have the illusion that I'm teaching them to protect themselves against adults right now. What I'm doing is I'm building a foundation, and I want it to be positive first. I do think, especially for girls, a good jujitsu, even just a year of really good jujitsu, because women get grabbed a lot more. And I don't want my daughters to freak out when somebody just grabs them. I want them to be very used to that and very comfortable with something like that. So I'm an advocate of good jujitsu training for young girls, really for my sons too. But for the girls, what's interesting is they get over the uncomfortableness of being grabbed right away, and then they learn how to use their body weight, get into it, and things like that. But yes, I will. I don't teach them my stuff out of the gate. What I will do is I'll play drills with them. They'll understand areas of the human body. So I'm already teaching them targets without them knowing it's targets, because I'm implanting that early on. But just make sure you get because there's so many you can go to a great art, but if the instructor cannot relate to your kid,
Right.
It's just not going to work.
Great point. Thanks, man. There was another question from one of my affiliates in Australia, Grant. It's way too long. Pop it off there. I'll summarize it. And we don't have time to get into it. He just wanted us to elaborate on because we both use a lot of slow motion movement to ingrain. What we're doing is we're trying to train the motor engrams, the signal speed, target acquisition, proximity sense, and you can't do that. We have an expression where we say, never practice pulling, never practice missing. And to go to your point, I had a guy once, mock me for using a training knife. He was challenged at a symposium where all these instructors are teaching, and there were people talking to me, and he didn't like that there were like 9 people at my table and nobody at his table beside each other. And he says, "Hey, do you use a real knife or a plastic or wooden knife when you do your knife drills?" I go, "Always plastic or wooden or a replica." He goes, we use real knives." And I was like, "Really?" I said, "How often do you rush your students to the hospital? And like, what kind of waiver do you have? Like, because you got to be killing people every class. Otherwise you're practicing pulling or missing if you're using a real knife." So Grant, we'll do that. I'll do another call with Tim about that, because I literally have a hard stop in 3 minutes. I got a call overseas with a country. Are you able to travel to the UK again?
No, not yet.
Crazy.
I can go to Ireland, so I've been doing that. I've been training some people over in Ireland, but
Nice.
I'm going to try now that they've finally shaken out everything, COVID's over. I'm going to try to apply this year and see if they'll lift the ban.
Yeah, that's nuts. Lisa, do we have any other questions? Short ones, or probably not? Can we pop up Tim's website on the bottom there, guys? Are those your big ones? TimLarkin.com as well.
And protect.com. We use a 3 because the 3 areas that we focus on that.
I dig it. Guys, obviously Tim's got a ton of information, and he's got some really good resources online that are free. Go check them out. Go follow his stuff. Tim, will you do another show with me?
Absolutely, brother. This is great. And hey, man, I love how you've upped your game, brother. You are this is awesome. This is a really professional setup. Your social media is on point, and it's great because you're a voice that needs to be heard. And I'm really glad that because I know it'd be easy not to do it, and it's a lot of work. So I appreciate it.
This is great. I learned a lot about you. I've known you for a couple of decades now, and I learned a lot more about you, and I'm excited to like share this. And I'm really digging this whole live thing, and I got a list of characters and some great people we're going to get on here, and I can have up to I think 8 or 10 people at once. So probably what we'll do is, with the right people, have that round table discussion, and it'll be fantastic. So we'll keep you abreast of that, and I'll look forward to seeing you soon, man.
You got it, brother. Be safe.
Okay. Be safe. Take care.
All right, man.
Bye, everybody. And I guess we're going to wrap this up here. Okay, thank you everyone for logging in there. Do me a favor, share this, tag your friends if you dug it, post your comments. I'll go try and answer any comments afterwards. But let people know, we want to grow this thing. I want to have some great guests on here. I love listening to Tim. I've heard him talk at lectures and conferences before, and I was excited to kick off this live stuff with him as my first guest. So again, the best thing you could do is subscribe. We really want to grow our YouTube channel. So please subscribe to our YouTube link. And Elisa, maybe you can pop that up there in the comments so people see the direct link. And if you've got questions or guests or things you want me to talk about or bring up in future things, email us. Pop up the email there, Elisa, too, please. It was nofear@blauertactical.com. Suggestions for guests or questions. And guys, I got to go. I've got a meeting that's starting right now. So hit the like button. Please share this across your platforms. Go follow Tim and subscribe on our YouTube, because we really want to grow that and get more content to you. Rock and roll, everybody. I appreciate it. Be safe.